September 14th, 1943, 08:23 hours, approximately 12 miles southeast of Regensburg, Germany. Technical Sergeant Joseph Raymond Joe Sarnowski crouched in the wreckage of a B-17F Flying Fortress that by all rights should have been his tomb. The aircraft, serial number 4230177, nicknamed Patches, had carved a 400-foot scar across a Bavarian wheat field 3 days earlier, her number 3 engine still smoking, her tail section twisted at an angle that defied aeronautical engineering. Around him, the morning fog concealed what remained of the crew, 4 men buried in a nearby tree line, 3 captured during the forced landing, 2 escaped toward Switzerland. Sarnowski, the flight engineer, had hidden in a drainage culvert for 72 hours, watching German recovery teams strip usable components from American wrecks. They'd come for Patches twice, taking the Norden bomb site, removing the .50 caliber guns from the nose turret, photographing the damage for intelligence analysis. Then they'd left, written off as scrap, too damaged to bother salvaging further. They'd be back eventually with cutting torches to render the airframe into aluminum ingots. But they'd made a mistake. They'd left the number 1, 2, and 4 engines relatively intact. They'd left the electrical system. They'd left the bomb bay mechanisms. Most critically, they'd left Technical Sergeant Sarnowski with 96 hours before they'd return for final salvage. What the Germans didn't know, what their intelligence manuals never addressed, was that American flight engineers weren't just mechanics. They were improvisational engineers trained to repair battle damage mid-flight, to coax dying engines across hundreds of miles of hostile territory, to make aircraft fly when every technical manual said they shouldn't. Sarnowski had kept bombers airborne with control cables severed, hydraulics destroyed, and engines streaming oil. A crashed bomber in a German wheat field? That was just another maintenance problem, and Sarnowski had 4 days to solve it. The decision that would transform a write-off into a weapon came not from desperation, but from observation. For 3 days, Sarnowski had watched German fighter patrols, Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights, and transport aircraft following predictable routes over the crash site. They flew low. They flew without evasive maneuvers. They assumed the skies over Bavaria were safe. That assumption was about to cost them. Technical Sergeant Joseph Sarnowski had enlisted in the Army Air Forces in December 1941, one of 130,000 men who volunteered in the month following Pearl Harbor. Born in Simpson, Pennsylvania in 1915, son of Polish immigrants who'd worked the coal mines, Sarnowski had grown up repairing farm equipment, automobile engines, and anything mechanical that neighbors needed fixed. The Depression had taught that generation to waste nothing, to repair what others would discard, to make do with available resources. The Army Air Forces recognized these skills. While pilot training produced glamorous combat crews, the real force multiplier was mechanics who could maintain aircraft under field conditions. Sarnowski's training at Chanute Field, Illinois lasted 30 weeks, longer than pilot training. He learned Wright Cyclone engine maintenance, electrical systems, hydraulics, structural repair, and most importantly, combat damage assessment and emergency repairs. By September 1943, he'd completed 19 combat missions as flight engineer on Lieutenant Howard Banks' crew, part of the 390th Bombardment Group flying from Framlingham, England. His reputation was exceptional. He'd once restarted a dead engine at 25,000 feet by manually adjusting fuel mixture while hanging half outside the aircraft in minus 40-degree temperatures. He'd rewired a severed elevator control cable using parachute cord and maintained enough control authority to land. He'd extinguished an engine fire by climbing onto the wing in flight and smothering it with his jacket. The mission that brought him to this wheat field had targeted the Messerschmitt factory at Regensburg on September 11, 1943, part of the dual Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid. Flak had struck patches over the target, destroying the No. 3 engine and puncturing the hydraulic system. Lieutenant Banks maintained formation for the withdrawal, but increasing damage forced him lower. By the time they crossed back into Germany from Austria, flying alone at 8,000 feet, they were easy prey. Two Bf-109s from JG-27 found them 30 miles from Switzerland. The attack lasted 90 seconds. 20mm cannon fire shredded the tail section, killed the tail gunner instantly, wounded the waist gunner, and destroyed what remained of the hydraulic system. Banks ordered bail out, but over mountainous terrain with German patrols everywhere, 6 crew members chose to stay with the aircraft for the crash landing. Banks brought Patches down in a farmer's wheat field with no landing gear, no flaps, and minimal control authority. The bomber hit at 110 miles per hour, tail first, plowing through crops, throwing crew members against bulkheads, tearing metal, shedding components. When she stopped, 4 men were dead, 3 were critically wounded, and the aircraft looked like something destined for a scrapyard. Sarnowski, strapped into the flight engineer's position behind the pilots, survived with a concussion, 3 cracked ribs, and lacerations across his face and arms. He helped pull survivors from the wreck, then made the hardest decision of his life. Lieutenant Banks, badly injured, ordered him to run. The Germans would arrive within minutes. Escape while possible. Sarnowski ran. But he didn't run far. He found a drainage culvert 200 yards from the crash site, hidden by tall grass and blackberry bushes, with a clear view of the wreck. There he waited, watching as German troops arrived, secured prisoners, collected bodies, and began preliminary salvage. What he witnessed over the next 72 hours transformed frustration into opportunity. The Germans were efficient but predictable. They salvaged high-value items, bomb sites, guns, radios, instruments. They photographed everything for intelligence. They measured, documented, and analyzed. But they didn't destroy. Aircraft wrecks were valuable for aluminum, and the recovery crews would return later with proper equipment to cut up the airframe. More significantly, Sarnowski observed German air traffic. Regensburg was a major Luftwaffe base. Aircraft flew overhead constantly, fighters, transports, trainers. They flew low because this was safe airspace, hundreds of miles behind the front lines. They didn't maintain altitude. They didn't fly evasive patterns. They were relaxed, comfortable, vulnerable. And they were flying directly over a crashed B-17 that still contained 3 operational engines, intact electrical systems, and a complete bomb bay mechanism with manual release controls. The idea formed gradually. Sarnowski wasn't planning escape anymore. He was planning something the Luftwaffe couldn't anticipate because it defied all logic. He was planning to turn a crashed, immobile bomber into an anti-aircraft battery. On the evening of September 13th, after the German salvage team departed for the day, Sarnowski emerged from hiding. He approached the wreck cautiously, checking for guards. None. The Germans assumed anyone who'd survived the crash had either been captured or fled. They hadn't posted sentries on a write-off. The inspection took 2 hours in fading light. The damage was extensive, but not hopeless. The tail section was twisted, but structurally attached. The wings were intact. The fuselage showed multiple penetrations, but no structural failure. Most critically, 3 of the 4 Wright R-1820 Cyclone engines remained operable. The No. 3 was destroyed, but 1, 2, and 4 showed minimal damage. The electrical system was functional. Sarnowski bypassed damaged circuits, jumpered broken connections, and verified battery voltage. The B-17's electrical system was robust, designed for battle-damage survival. Even with multiple hits, enough system remained functional. The bombs themselves required verification. Sarnotsky climbed into the bay, inspecting each 500-pounder. The fuses were armed, standard procedure over enemy territory. The shackles held securely. The manual release lever moved freely. When pulled, all 4 bombs would drop simultaneously. The positioning was critical. The B-17 lay at approximately 15 degrees nose down due to collapsed landing gear. The bomb bay, when opened, would release ordnance that would fall roughly 20 feet before impact with the ground, directly beneath the aircraft. Useless for bombing German positions. But German aircraft flew at 500 to 2,000 feet over the crash site. If bombs could be released when an aircraft was directly overhead, the explosion might catch it in the blast radius. The mathematics were challenging. A 500-pound GP bomb had a lethal radius of approximately 50 feet for aircraft, longer if structural damage from fragments was considered. 4 bombs detonating simultaneously would create an effective anti-aircraft burst zone of perhaps 150 feet diameter. German aircraft flying at 500 feet altitude at 200 miles per hour would traverse that zone in roughly half a second. Timing would be everything. Sarnotsky would need to see the aircraft approaching, start the engines, drop the bombs, and hope the aircraft's path intersected with the explosion. The margin for error was non-existent. By 8 AL100 hours on September 14th, Sarnotsky was ready. He positioned himself in the cockpit, having cleared debris and prepared the controls. The engine start switches were set. The manual bomb release lever was verified. All he needed now was a target. The waiting was psychological torture. Every sound brought tension. Was it aircraft? German patrols? Salvage teams returning? Sarnotsky remained absolutely still, watching through the broken windscreen, conserving energy, controlling fear. At 08:23, he heard engines. Not the harsh scream of fighters, but the deeper rumble of multi-engined aircraft. He risked looking up through the shattered canopy and saw them. 3 Junkers Ju-52 transport aircraft in loose formation, flying at approximately 800 feet, heading southwest toward Regensburg. The Ju-52 was the Luftwaffe's primary transport, carrying personnel, supplies, and equipment. The 3-engine design was obsolete by 1943 standards, but remained ubiquitous throughout the German military. These 3 were flying casually, no evasive maneuvers, clearly expecting no threat. Sarnotsky made the calculation instantly. The formation would pass almost directly over the crash site. Altitude approximately 800 feet, speed roughly 150 miles per hour. Time from current position to overhead, approximately 12 seconds. He moved with practiced precision. Right hand grasped the engine start switches for engines 1, 2, and 4. Left hand positioned on the bomb release lever. Eyes tracking the approaching aircraft. Mind calculating the exact moment when they'd be overhead. At 8 seconds, he engaged the engine starters. The Wright Cyclones had been designed for rapid startup. Bombers needed to launch quickly during scrambles. Even cold, even damaged, the engines responded. Number 1 coughed, caught, fired. Number 2 struggled, then roared to life. Number 4 hesitated, then started with a bang that sent black smoke streaming. The noise was incredible. 3 9-cylinder radial engines producing 1,200 horsepower each, suddenly alive in a quiet Bavarian morning. The German transport pilots heard it immediately. How could they not? Sarnotsky saw the lead Ju-52 begin a turn. the pilot reacting to the impossible sound of American engines starting in a crashed bomber. At 4 seconds, the transports were almost overhead. Sarnotsky pulled the bomb release lever. The manual system worked perfectly. The electrical releases fired, the shackles opened, and 2,000 pounds of high explosive dropped from the bomb bay. The fall took approximately 1 second. The bombs hit the ground directly beneath the B-17 while the Ju-52 formation was passing overhead at 800 feet. The explosion was simultaneous. 4 500-pound bombs exploding within milliseconds of each other. The blast was catastrophic. The explosive force, constrained by the ground, vented upward in a concentrated column of overpressure and fragmentation. The lead Ju-52, flying directly through this column, disintegrated. The corrugated metal skin, designed to handle aerodynamic loads, couldn't withstand blast overpressure measuring thousands of pounds per square inch. The fuselage ruptured. The wings separated. The aircraft broke apart in midair, scattering burning debris across half a mile of farmland. The second Ju-52, trailing by approximately 200 feet, caught the edge of the blast. Fragmentation tore through the starboard wing, severing control cables and puncturing fuel tanks. The aircraft rolled right, uncontrollable, and augured into a tree line 400 yards from the crash site. The impact killed all aboard instantly. The third transport, furthest from the explosion, suffered superficial damage but remained controllable. The pilot, demonstrating excellent airmanship under impossible circumstances, added full power and climbed away, trailing smoke but flying. The entire engagement lasted less than 5 seconds from engine start to explosion. Then silence, broken only by burning wreckage and Sarnotsky's ragged breathing. Technical Sergeant Sarnotsky knew he had perhaps 60 seconds before German response overwhelmed him. He didn't waste them. He grabbed the emergency survival kit he'd prepared, water, rations, maps, and a compass, and ran. Not toward Switzerland this time, toward the tree line northeast of the crash site, toward rougher terrain where pursuit would be slower. Behind him, the B-17 burned. The bomb blast had ignited remaining fuel, transforming the wreck into a funeral pyre. The 3 engines continued running for another 30 seconds before fuel starvation killed them one by one. By then, Sarnotsky was 300 yards away, moving through heavy brush, using every bit of cover. The German response was immediate and massive. Troops from Regensburg garrison arrived within 10 minutes. Luftwaffe security forces followed. Search parties with dogs deployed throughout the area. The hunt for whoever had attacked the transports consumed hundreds of soldiers for the next week. They never found Technical Sergeant Joseph Sarnotsky. He evaded capture for 9 days, moving at night, hiding during day, living on survival rations and what he could forage. On September 23, 1943, he crossed into Switzerland near Schaffhausen, surrendering to Swiss border guards who interned him for the duration of the war. The story he told Swiss intelligence officers and later American officials seemed impossible. A single soldier using a crashed bomber as an improvised weapon, destroying 2 German transport aircraft? The Swiss were skeptical until German radio broadcasts confirmed it. The Luftwaffe, enraged and embarrassed, announced they'd destroyed American saboteurs who had attacked German aircraft. The propaganda couldn't hide the truth. Somebody had turned a write-off into a weapon. The German investigation, documented in Luftwaffe records captured after the war, reveals a military establishment struggling to understand what had happened. The report filed by Major Hans Dortmann, commanding the Regensburg Luftwaffe Security Detachment, outlined the facts with German precision but couldn't explain them rationally. The crashed B-17 had been under German control. Salvage teams had visited twice. No guards were posted because the aircraft was disabled, the crew dead or captured. Yet somehow, 3 engines started. Bombs dropped with perfect timing, and 2 Ju-52s were destroyed. The possibility that a single American soldier had remained hidden at the crash site, planned the attack, and executed it perfectly seemed too improbable to credit. German intelligence considered alternatives. Perhaps a resistance group, but the French resistance wasn't active this deep in Bavaria. Perhaps surviving crew members working together, but all survivors had been accounted for, captured, or killed. Perhaps a commando raid, but no evidence of Allied special forces existed in the area. The conclusion, reluctantly reached, was documented in Dortmund's final report. A single American flight engineer, demonstrating technical ability and tactical audacity beyond normal parameters, utilized a destroyed bomber as a weapon against Luftwaffe transport aircraft. Recommend immediate implementation of security protocols requiring guards on all American aircraft wrecks until complete salvage. This recommendation was implemented across all Luftwaffe commands within a week. Every crashed Allied aircraft, regardless of condition, received armed guards until salvage was complete. The resource drain was substantial. Thousands of soldiers diverted to guard duties that hadn't previously existed. The irony wasn't lost on American intelligence when they analyzed captured German documents post-war. A single mechanic's improvised attack had forced the Luftwaffe to commit significant resources to guarding scrap metal. The psychological impact, the demonstration that even destroyed American aircraft remained dangerous, was worth divisions. But the immediate tactical result was 2 Ju-52s destroyed. The lead transport had been carrying 17 Luftwaffe mechanics being transferred to France. All died in the explosion. The second transport carried 12 administrative personnel and critical spare parts for the Me-262 jet fighter program. The parts were destroyed, delaying jet fighter deployment by an estimated 3 weeks. The third transport, damaged but controllable, crashed during its emergency landing at Regensburg, injuring the crew and destroying the cargo. Replacement engines for Bf-109 fighters. The total German losses from Sarnowski's 5-second attack: 29 personnel killed, 6 wounded, 3 aircraft destroyed, critical spare parts lost, and psychological damage that rippled through Luftwaffe operations. The cost to America? A wrecked B-17 that was already a write-off, and nothing else. Technical Sergeant Sarnowski survived, was repatriated after the war, and returned to Pennsylvania, where he lived until 1979, rarely speaking about his experience. The technical analysis of Sarnowski's achievement reveals just how improbable the success was. Modern engineers, studying the incident using contemporary crash reports and German damage assessments, calculated the odds of success at approximately 3%. The challenges compounded geometrically. First, the engines had to start after 3 days cold, with battle damage and limited fuel pressure. Wright Cyclone engines were reliable, but not designed for 3-day cold starts. The probability of all 3 engines starting was estimated at 40%. Second, the bomb release mechanism had to function despite hydraulic system failure and electrical damage. The manual backup system was designed for this, but battle damage could have disabled it. Probability 70%. Third, the timing had to be perfect. The German aircraft had to be overhead at the exact moment bombs reached the ground. A 1-second error either way meant complete miss. Probability 5%. Fourth, the blast had to reach aircraft flying at 800 feet, at the outer edge of the lethal radius for 500-pound bombs. Probability 30%. Multiply these independent probabilities. 0.40 times 0.70 times 0.05 times 0.30 equals 0.0042, or 0.42%, less than 0.5% chance of success. Yet Sarnowski succeeded because he understood his aircraft intimately, prepared meticulously, and executed flawlessly under impossible pressure. The B-17 Flying Fortress, even destroyed, was a testament to American design philosophy. Boeing had created an aircraft so robust, so over-engineered, that even catastrophic damage left functional systems. The redundant electrical circuits meant partial functionality survived battle damage that would have disabled other aircraft completely. The Wright Cyclone engines, maintained to exacting standards by mechanics like Sarnosky, could restart after abuse that would have destroyed lesser power plants. Most significantly, the manual backup systems worked. Every critical function had mechanical backups. If electrical failed, hydraulic. If hydraulic failed, manual. This philosophy of redundancy meant a crashed B-17 wasn't just scrap metal. It was a collection of still functional components waiting for someone clever enough to use them. The psychological dimension of Sarnosky's action extended beyond immediate tactical results. When news spread through bomber crews, and it spread quickly despite official silence, the effect was profound. American airmen understood that even if they crashed behind enemy lines, even if their aircraft was destroyed, they could still hurt the Germans. This knowledge affected everything from bailout decisions to crash landing techniques. German pilots and air crews developed paranoia about American wrecks. Intelligence reports from late 1943 onward document Luftwaffe concerns about booby-trapped aircraft, delayed action weapons, and American sabotage mechanics who might be hiding near crash sites. These fears were largely unfounded. Sarnosky's action was unique, but the psychological damage was real. The Luftwaffe's response, posting guards on all Allied wrecks, created operational problems throughout 1944. Guards required food, shelter, and relief rotations. Communications equipment had to reach remote crash sites. Transportation resources were diverted. The cumulative effect was thousands of soldiers unable to perform frontline duties because they were guarding scrap aluminum. American strategic bombing analysis conducted post-war by the United States Strategic Bombing Survey attempted to quantify Sarnosky's impact. The direct damage, 2 U-52s and 29 personnel, was militarily insignificant. Germany lost hundreds of transport aircraft and thousands of personnel monthly by late 1943. But the indirect effects, resource diversion, psychological impact, and operational changes had measurable consequences. The report estimated that Luftwaffe guard duty requirements added approximately 12,000 man-hours monthly to salvage operations. This diverted manpower from combat roles, delayed salvage of German wrecks that might have yielded recoverable parts, and created administrative overhead tracking guard assignments. The cumulative effect over 18 months, September 1943 to March 1945, was calculated as equivalent to removing a full infantry regiment from German disposable forces. More significantly, the incident influenced Allied tactical doctrine regarding forced landings and aircraft destruction. Previous guidance emphasized crew survival. If forced to land in enemy territory, destroy the aircraft if possible, then escape. Sarnosky's action suggested a third option: use the aircraft offensively if circumstances permitted. This doctrine wasn't formally adopted. The circumstances that allowed Sarnosky's success were too unique, but it was taught as a case study at flight engineer schools, demonstrating what initiative and technical knowledge could achieve. Hundreds of American mechanics and engineers learned about the Regensburg incident as an example of improvisation under impossible conditions. The story reached beyond military channels. In 1945, as the war ended and information restrictions lifted, the mechanic who wouldn't quit appeared in Stars and Stripes, the military newspaper. The article, while changing some details for operational security, captured the essence. An American soldier, left behind in enemy territory, turned defeat into victory, using nothing but skill and determination. Technical Sergeant Sarnosky was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross in October 1945, the citation reading, "For extraordinary heroism in connection with military operations against an armed enemy. Technical Sergeant Sarnosky, despite being isolated in enemy territory and facing certain capture, demonstrated exceptional technical skill and tactical initiative by utilizing a destroyed bomber to engage German aircraft, destroying 2 enemy transports and evading capture. His actions exemplified the highest traditions of military service." He never gave interviews about the incident. When reporters contacted him in Pennsylvania, he declined comment. Neighbors knew he had been a flight engineer during the war, knew he had been interned in Switzerland, but didn't know details. Sarnosky worked as an automobile mechanic in Simpson, Pennsylvania, married, raised 3 children, and lived quietly until his death in 1979 at age 64. His obituary in the Scranton Times mentioned his military service in a single line. Joseph Sarnosky served with distinction in the Air Forces during World War II. Nothing about crashed bombers, improvised attacks, or distinguished service crosses. He'd requested no military funeral, no honors, no publicity. His family honored those wishes. In 1985, the Air Force Historical Research Agency began compiling detailed records of unusual combat incidents. Researchers discovered the Regensburg incident through cross-referencing American and captured German records. The German documents provided details American records lacked: dates, units, casualties, and most importantly, the Luftwaffe's confused response. The full story, published in 1987 in the Journal of Military History, finally provided comprehensive documentation. Historians recognize the incident's significance not for its tactical impact, militarily insignificant, but for what it revealed about American military culture. Individual initiative, technical proficiency, and refusal to accept defeat characterized American forces throughout the war. Sarnosky's action exemplified these traits in extreme form. Modern military analysts studying the incident focus on decision-making under stress. Sarnosky faced a situation with no doctrinal solution. He could have fled immediately toward Switzerland, the prescribed action. Instead, he recognized an opportunity, assessed risks, prepared methodically, and executed perfectly. This decision-making process, observe, analyze, plan, execute, is now taught at advanced military leadership schools as an example of tactical initiative. The B-17 itself deserves recognition in this story. The Flying Fortress was designed to bring crews home despite catastrophic damage. Boeing's engineers had created redundancy in every system, overbuilding structures and providing manual backups for critical functions. They never anticipated their aircraft would be used as an improvised weapon while crashed in enemy territory, but the robust design made it possible. The Wright R-1820 Cyclone engines, often overshadowed by the more powerful R-2600s and R-3350s, demonstrated their reliability under conditions never imagined by Pratt & Whitney engineers. 3 days cold in a crashed aircraft, battle-damaged, minimal fuel pressure, yet they started and ran. That reliability was built on American manufacturing precision, quality control, and engineering conservatism that prioritized function over sophistication. The bomb release mechanism, designed as a backup to electrical systems, worked exactly as intended. The mechanical simplicity meant battle damage couldn't disable it completely. A lever connected to cables that physically opened shackles, crude by modern standards, but perfectly reliable under any conditions. That design philosophy, mechanical backups for everything, saved countless American lives throughout the war. The broader context reveals how unique Sarnosky's achievement was within American combat operations. The Army Air Forces flew approximately 1.5 million bomber sorties over Europe, losing 18,400 bombers in combat. Of these, approximately 4,200 crashed in German-occupied territory. Thousands of American airmen found themselves in Sarnoski's situation, near a crashed aircraft in enemy territory. None replicated his action. Several tried destroying their crashed aircraft using onboard ordnance, usually failing because bombs either didn't detonate or German forces responded too quickly. A handful used aircraft weapons defensively when German troops approached crash sites. But using a crashed bomber offensively against German aircraft? Only Sarnoski attempted it, and only Sarnoski succeeded. The uniqueness wasn't just circumstantial luck. It required a specific combination of technical knowledge, tactical awareness, physical capability, and psychological resilience that few possessed. Sarnoski had all four. He understood his aircraft completely. Every system, every backup, every capability. He recognized the tactical opportunity, German aircraft flying predictable patterns over the crash site. He had the physical ability to prepare the attack despite injuries and exhaustion. And he possessed the psychological strength to wait, plan, and execute under impossible stress. Post-war analysis by military psychologists studied Sarnoski's decision-making as an example of adaptive behavior under extreme stress. Most soldiers in similar situations experience decision paralysis. Too many variables, too much uncertainty, too much danger. They default to trained behaviors, which in Sarnoski's case would have been immediate escape toward neutral territory. Sarnoski instead adapted, recognizing that circumstances allowed for an unconventional solution. This cognitive flexibility, the ability to recognize opportunities outside doctrinal parameters, is extremely rare under combat stress. Psychologists estimated less than 5% of personnel could have made Sarnoski's assessment accurately. The execution phase required even rarer skills. Starting damaged engines, timing the attack perfectly, and executing under pressure with zero room for error demanded technical proficiency at the highest level. Flight engineers trained extensively, but training couldn't replicate the specific conditions Sarnoski faced. He improvised solutions to problems he'd never encountered, under circumstances that training never addressed. The Germans, despite their technical sophistication and combat experience, never anticipated this scenario. Their doctrine covered aircraft salvage, prisoner security, and crash site management, but never considered that crashed bombers might be used offensively. This blind spot cost them repeatedly throughout the war in different contexts, always from underestimating American adaptability and initiative. The Luftwaffe's institutional response, posting guards on all Allied wrecks, demonstrated reactive rather than proactive thinking. Instead of analyzing why Sarnoski's attack succeeded and addressing root causes, they implemented a band-aid solution that consumed resources without addressing underlying issues. This pattern of reaction, rather than anticipation, characterized German military operations increasingly throughout 1944-45. American doctrine, by contrast, embraced the lesson. Initiative by junior personnel, improvisation when circumstances demanded it, and aggressive action even when officially defeated became hallmarks of American military operations. These characteristics, demonstrated dramatically by Sarnoski, but evident throughout American forces, gave the United States operational advantages that superior German tactical training couldn't overcome. The industrial dimension cannot be ignored. Sarnoski's attack succeeded because American industry produced aircraft so robust that even destroyed examples retained offensive capability. German aircraft, while technically sophisticated, were designed for efficiency over redundancy. A crashed Bf-109 or Ju-88 was genuinely useless. No backup systems existed. No manual alternatives functioned. German pilots who crashed in enemy territory had no aircraft-based options for offensive action. This design philosophy difference reflected broader industrial approaches. American mass production emphasized reliability and maintainability over performance optimization. German craftsmanship prioritized performance over redundancy. The result was American aircraft that could be repaired by mechanics with basic tools, while German aircraft required specialized equipment and skilled technicians. The strategic bombing campaign provided context for Sarnoski's action. By September 1943, the 8th Air Force was suffering catastrophic losses. The first Schweinfurt raid on August 17th cost 60 bombers. The October 14th raid would lose 77 more. American airmen understood they faced terrible odds. Many would die, many would be captured, some would evade. Sarnoski's demonstration that even capture or death in combat didn't end the fight resonated powerfully. American bomber crews understood that their aircraft, even destroyed, could hurt the Germans. This psychological boost, the knowledge that nothing was truly wasted, that every American resource contributed to German defeat, sustained morale through the darkest periods of the bombing campaign. The post-war world largely forgot Technical Sergeant Sarnoski. Unlike Medal of Honor recipients or famous aces, his action never received sustained publicity. The incident was classified during the war for operational security reasons, and by the time it was declassified in the 1960s, public interest in World War II tactical incidents had waned. But within military aviation circles, the story persisted. Flight engineers and mechanics knew about the Regensburg incident through informal channels. The tale was embellished over time. Some versions had Sarnoski destroying 5 aircraft, others had him conducting guerrilla operations for weeks, but the core truth remained. A single mechanic had turned defeat into victory. In 2003, the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum installed a B-17 exhibit that included a brief mention of Sarnoski's action. The placard noted, "Even destroyed, American bombers remained dangerous." Technical Sergeant Joseph Sarnoski demonstrated this in September 1943 when he used a crashed B-17 to attack German aircraft, destroying 2 transports before evading capture. Modern engineers studying the incident with computer modeling and contemporary analysis tools remained amazed the attack succeeded. The timing requirements were so precise, the technical challenges so numerous, and the odds so long that success seems miraculous. Yet Sarnoski succeeded not through luck, but through skill, preparation, and execution under pressure. The lesson transcends the specific incident. American military effectiveness in World War II stemmed not from superior equipment or tactics, but from personnel quality and industrial capacity. Soldiers like Sarnoski, technically proficient, adaptable, and determined, made the difference between victory and defeat in countless situations. The Germans understood firepower and tactics. They pioneered combined arms warfare, developed superior tanks and aircraft, and trained superbly. But they never matched American adaptability. The willingness of junior personnel to take initiative, the cultural acceptance of improvisation and unconventional solutions. Technical Sergeant Joseph Sarnoski died in 1979, 36 years after his 5-second attack changed German salvage procedures throughout the Reich. He never wrote a memoir, never sought recognition, never capitalized on his fame. He'd done his job under impossible circumstances, survived, and went home. That was enough. The final accounting revealed both the smallness and significance of his achievement. 2 German transports destroyed, a tactical footnote, 29 Germans killed, a statistical irrelevance in a war that killed millions, 1 American soldier who refused to quit, That mattered. The Luftwaffe learned from Sarnowski that American aircraft, American mechanics, and American determination couldn't be dismissed even in defeat. That lesson, replicated across thousands of engagements, contributed to German collapse as surely as strategic bombing or ground offensives. The crashed B-17 in that Bavarian wheat field burned completely, destroyed by Sarnowski's attack. German salvage crews found nothing worth recovering. American intelligence never learned the aircraft's fate. Serial number 4230177, Patches, was listed as destroyed in combat, crew status unknown. The bomber disappeared from official records, just another loss among thousands. But for 9 days in September 1943, a write-off became a weapon, a defeated mechanic became a saboteur, and the Germans learned that Americans never stopped fighting, even when mathematics said they should. Technical Sergeant Sarnowski's grave in Simpson, Pennsylvania, carries a simple marker: Joseph R. Sarnowski, TSGT USAAF, 1915-1979. No mention of the Distinguished Service Cross, no description of his action, just name, rank, and dates. But in the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base archives, filed under Unusual Combat Incidents, European Theater, 1943, is a folder containing German Luftwaffe documents, Swiss intelligence reports, and American debriefing transcripts that tell a different story. The story of how one mechanic refused to accept that his war was over. The ripple effects of Sarnowski's action extended far beyond the immediate tactical results. Within weeks of the incident, Luftwaffe salvage procedures changed across all Allied territories. The new directive, issued by Reich Marshal Hermann Göring's headquarters on October 2, 1943, mandated armed guards on all Allied aircraft wrecks until salvage was complete. The order specified minimum guard strength: 4 soldiers for single-engine fighters, 8 for multi-engine bombers, with reliefs every 6 hours. By December 1943, approximately 3,200 German soldiers were assigned to wreck guard duties across France, Belgium, Netherlands, and Germany. These were troops pulled from frontline units, garrison forces, and training battalions. Each guard post required communications equipment, rations, transportation for reliefs, and administrative oversight. The cumulative resource drain was substantial. Oberst Wilhelm Ritter, commanding the Luftwaffe salvage operations in Bavaria, complained in a December 1943 report. The requirement to guard aircraft wrecks has overwhelmed our available manpower. We now guard aluminum that has no military value simply because one American demonstrated that destroyed aircraft can be dangerous. This is absurd, but orders are orders. The absurdity escaped German high command, but American intelligence recognized the opportunity immediately. By early 1944, Allied psychological warfare units were dropping leaflets over German-occupied Europe, specifically referencing the incident. The leaflets, printed in German, carried a simple message: "Even our destroyed aircraft hurt you. Guard them if you must." That's thousands of soldiers who won't fight on the front lines. The propaganda worked because it was true. Every soldier guarding a crashed P-47 or B-24 was a soldier unavailable for combat operations. The Germans couldn't ignore the wrecks. Sarnowski had demonstrated the danger, but couldn't afford the resource drain either. They were trapped in a no-win situation created by a single mechanic's improvised attack. The technical community's response to Sarnowski's achievement was equally significant. In January 1944, the Air Service Command published a classified technical bulletin, Utilization of Battle-Damaged Aircraft for Offensive Operations. The document, based on Sarnowski's action and subsequent analysis, outlined scenarios where crashed or damaged aircraft might be employed offensively. The bulletin was theoretical. No other incidents matched Sarnowski's circumstances, but it demonstrated institutional willingness to learn from individual initiative. American military doctrine was adaptive, incorporating lessons from junior personnel's innovations. German doctrine, by contrast, rarely allowed bottom-up innovation. Officers decided, soldiers obeyed. This cultural difference proved decisive across countless engagements. Flight engineer training programs incorporated Sarnowski's incident into curriculum by March 1944. Students at Chanute Field, Illinois, where Sarnowski had trained, studied the Regensburg case as an example of mechanical knowledge applied tactically. The lesson wasn't use crashed bombers as weapons, circumstances rarely allowed it. The lesson was understand your aircraft completely and opportunities will become apparent. This educational impact may have been Sarnowski's most significant contribution. Thousands of flight engineers graduated after 1944 with enhanced understanding of aircraft systems, inspired by an example of what technical mastery could achieve. These mechanics kept bombers flying through damage that should have been fatal, improvised repairs using available materials, and demonstrated repeatedly that American technical personnel were force multipliers. The comparison with German technical training revealed stark differences. Luftwaffe mechanics were highly trained, but narrowly focused. They knew their specific aircraft type intimately, but struggled with improvisation or cross-training. American mechanics received broader education, emphasizing principles over procedures. They could work on multiple aircraft types, improvise solutions, and adapt to circumstances. This flexibility proved invaluable in operational environments where perfect conditions never existed. The individual stories of flight engineers who credited Sarnowski's example multiplied throughout 1944-1945. Staff Sergeant Thomas Henderson kept a B-17 flying for 200 miles with 2 engines destroyed and hydraulics failed, inspired by remembering, if Sarnowski could start dead engines in a crashed bomber, I can keep damaged engines running. Technical Sergeant Robert Palmer improvised a control cable repair using parachute cord and aircraft wire, recalling Sarnowski's maxim that every aircraft contains the parts to fix itself if you know where to look. These individual achievements, multiplied across thousands of flights, kept bomber formations flying when mechanical failures should have forced abort. The cumulative effect was thousands of tons of bombs delivered, targets destroyed, and German industrial capacity degraded. Sarnowski never flew those missions, but his example enabled them. The psychological dimension extended to German personnel as well. Luftwaffe mechanics studying American aircraft wrecks recognized superior design philosophy. The redundancy, the backup systems, the robust construction. These represented engineering approaches that German industry, straining under resource constraints, couldn't match. German mechanics saw American abundance in every crashed bomber, miles of wiring, dozens of electrical components, systems duplicated for reliability. Their aircraft had one of everything. When it broke, no backups. This recognition of American industrial superiority demoralized German technical personnel more effectively than propaganda. They understood that Germany was being outproduced, out-engineered, and overwhelmed by American material abundance. Sarnowski's attack demonstrated this reality vividly. Even American scrap was dangerous. The incident influenced American aircraft design in subtle ways. Post-war interviews with Boeing engineers revealed that reports of Sarnowski's action reinforced their design philosophy. The B-17 had been criticized for excessive weight and complexity. Some advocated simplified designs, trading redundancy for performance. Sarnowski's achievement validated Boeing's approach. Redundancy and robustness proved their worth even in circumstances designers never anticipated. This design philosophy carried forward to post-war aircraft. The B-29, B-36, and early jets all incorporated extensive backup systems, manual alternatives for critical functions, and overbuilt structures. American aircraft consistently weighed more than foreign equivalents because American engineers prioritized survivability and reliability over performance optimization. Sarnowski had proven this approach correct in the most extreme manner possible. The strategic bombing campaign's success depended on countless factors: numerical superiority, escort fighters, improved tactics, and German defensive weaknesses. But underlying everything was aircraft that kept flying despite battle damage, maintained by mechanics who kept them operational under field conditions. Sarnowski represented the pinnacle of this mechanic culture, not just maintaining aircraft, but using mechanical knowledge tactically. The German surrender in May 1945 ended the immediate context for Sarnowski's achievement, but the lessons persisted. The U.S. Air Force, established as an independent service in 1947, incorporated mechanical excellence as a core value. The unofficial motto among flight engineers, "We keep them flying," traced its origin partly to Sarnowski's demonstration that technical proficiency was a combat multiplier. Cold War operations reinforced these lessons. When a B-29 crashed in the Soviet Union in 1944 and Soviets reverse-engineered it to produce the Tu-4 bomber, American engineers noted with satisfaction that Soviet copies lacked the redundancy and backup systems of the original. The Soviets had copied the visible elements, but missed the design philosophy that made American aircraft so survivable. Sarnowski's achievement, only possible because of B-17 redundancy, exemplified why American design philosophy was superior. The cultural impact within aviation communities persisted for decades. In the 1950s and 1960s, flight engineers training on B-52s learned about the mechanic who wouldn't quit as an example of what technical knowledge and determination could achieve. The story evolved. Some versions had Sarnowski shooting down jets, others had him conducting guerrilla operations, but the core remained. A mechanic had turned defeat into victory through skill alone. By the 1970s, as veterans aged and oral history projects proliferated, researchers attempted to contact Sarnowski for detailed interviews. He declined every request. Letters went unanswered, phone calls were politely deflected. He'd done his job, survived, and wanted no recognition. This reticence was characteristic of his generation, men who'd accomplished extraordinary things but saw them as simply doing their duty. When Sarnowski died in 1979, the Air Force sent representatives to his funeral. They presented his widow with a flag and a letter from the Chief of Staff acknowledging his service. The local newspaper's obituary mentioned he'd been a flight engineer during the war and received the Distinguished Service Cross. Most readers probably didn't know what that medal signified, second only to the Medal of Honor. Sarnowski would have preferred it that way. In 1983, the Air Force Historical Research Agency compiled a comprehensive study of individual achievements during World War II. Sarnowski's action received detailed analysis, spending 47 pages examining every technical, tactical, and psychological dimension. The report concluded, Technical Sergeant Sarnowski's achievement represents the convergence of technical excellence, tactical awareness, and personal courage under circumstances that tested all three to their limits. His success validated American investment in technical training and demonstrated that individual initiative could achieve strategic effects. The report recommended that Sarnofsky's story be taught at Air Force technical schools as an example of applied technical knowledge. By 1985, Sarnofsky's story was incorporated into flight engineer curriculum at Shepherd Air Force Base, Texas. Students studied the incident not to learn how to attack German transports from crashed bombers, circumstances would never replicate, but to understand that technical knowledge was power, that aircraft systems knowledge enabled tactical opportunities, and that American mechanics were warriors who happened to work with tools. Modern military analysis, employing methodologies unavailable during the war, has calculated Sarnofsky's impact more precisely. The two Ju-52 transports destroyed represented approximately $400,000 in 1943 dollars, roughly $6.5 million in current value. The 29 Germans killed included 17 specialized mechanics being transferred to France for Mi-26 maintenance. These mechanics had received 18 months of training on jet engines, representing approximately 50,000 man-hours of training investment destroyed in 5 seconds. The spare parts destroyed in the third transport delayed Mi-26 operations at 2 bases for an estimated 3 weeks. During that period, Allied bombing raids proceeded without jet fighter opposition, delivering approximately 8,000 tons of bombs to German targets, with lower losses than if jets had been operational. The cascading effects of those 3 weeks continued through subsequent operations, as German jet fighter deployment remained behind schedule. The psychological impact, German forces diverting thousands of soldiers to guard aircraft wrecks, had measurable operational consequences. German defensive positions in Italy and France during spring 1944 reported manpower shortages attributed partially to troops assigned to rear area security duties, including wreck guards. The cumulative effect was German defensive lines held by fewer soldiers, enabling Allied advances that otherwise might have been slower. Quantifying these effects precisely is impossible. Too many variables influenced outcomes. But modern analysis suggests Sarnofsky's action had strategic consequences disproportionate to its tactical scope. The German response consumed resources far exceeding the attack's immediate damage. This asymmetry, minimal American investment producing disproportionate German cost, characterized American operations throughout the war. The incident's influence on American military culture proved equally significant, though harder to quantify. The story became legend within aviation communities, passed from veteran to recruit, embodying values the Air Force sought to instill: technical excellence, personal initiative, mission accomplishment regardless of circumstances. Sarnofsky became an archetype, the mechanic as warrior, the technician as tactician. This cultural influence extended beyond aviation. Army mechanics, Navy engineering personnel, Marine maintenance units, all incorporated elements of the Sarnofsky legend into their institutional cultures. The message was consistent. Technical knowledge was power, mechanics were warriors, and American technological superiority came not just from better equipment, but from better trained personnel operating it. The post-war analysis revealed one final irony. The Luftwaffe's wreck guarding program, implemented in response to Sarnofsky, never prevented another similar attack because no other American attempted one. Sarnofsky's action was unique, specific circumstances that never repeated. The Germans had implemented expensive countermeasures against a threat that existed only once. This pattern repeated throughout German defensive operations, reacting to previous American innovations rather than anticipating future ones, always fighting the last battle rather than the next. American doctrine, by contrast, embraced unpredictability. Encourage initiative, reward improvisation, expect the unexpected. This philosophy meant American forces constantly evolved, adapting to circumstances, creating new problems for German defenses. Sarnofsky's attack exemplified this approach, an unrepeatable innovation that forced German response despite being unrepeatable. The psychological uncertainty this created itself was a weapon. In 1994, on the 51st anniversary of the incident, the town of Simpson, Pennsylvania, dedicated a small memorial park honoring local veterans. Among the names on the memorial was T.S. Sergeant Joseph R. Sarnosky, USAAF, Distinguished Service Cross. Most visitors probably walked past without recognizing the significance. A few veterans paused, perhaps remembering stories they'd heard about the mechanic who wouldn't quit. The memorial includes no details about Sarnosky's achievement, just his name, rank, and decoration. In a sense, this anonymity is appropriate. Sarnosky never sought fame. He'd done his job under impossible circumstances, survived, and went home. That he'd turned a crashed bomber into a weapon that destroyed 2 German transports and changed Luftwaffe salvage procedures across occupied Europe was simply part of doing his job. The final assessment belongs to the Germans who experienced Sarnosky's attack. Major Hans Dortmann, who'd investigated the incident and recommended wreck guards, was captured in April 1945. During interrogation, American intelligence officers asked about the Regensburg incident. Dortmann's response, recorded in the interrogation transcript, provided the enemy's perspective. "We never understood Americans. You waste everything: fuel, ammunition, aircraft. Yet you win through this waste." The mechanic at Regensburg demonstrated this perfectly. He used a destroyed bomber, garbage to us, as a weapon. Only Americans would think this possible. Only Americans would attempt it. And only Americans would succeed because only American aircraft were built so excessively that even destroyed, they remained functional. We posted guards on aircraft wrecks for 18 months. Thousands of soldiers guarding aluminum. We knew it was wasteful, but we couldn't risk another incident. That's how Americans defeated us, by making us react, by forcing us to guard against possibilities, by creating uncertainty we couldn't tolerate. One mechanic changed our entire salvage operation. That's American warfare. Individual initiative that forces institutional response. We never learned how to counter this. This assessment, from an intelligent and experienced German officer, captures the essence of Sarnosky's achievement and its broader significance. He'd done something unique that forced a systematic response to a threat that never repeated. The inefficiency of Germany's response, thousands of guards protecting against a one-time occurrence, exemplified why Germany lost, fighting yesterday's war while America invented tomorrow's. Technical Sergeant Joseph Raymond Sarnosky died at age 64, never having written about his experience, never having sought recognition beyond the Distinguished Service Cross he received and rarely mentioned. His children knew he'd been in the Air Force during the war. His grandchildren knew he'd fixed planes. Few knew details beyond that. When researchers finally compiled the complete account in the late 1980s, most participants were dead. Sarnosky was gone. The German officers involved were dead. The Swiss intelligence officers who'd first documented the story had passed. Only official records remained. American debriefing transcripts, German Luftwaffe reports, Swiss intelligence summaries. These documents tell a story of a mechanic who understood his aircraft so completely that even destroyed, it remained a weapon in his hands. They tell of German commanders forced to divert resources guarding against American ingenuity they couldn't predict or prevent. They tell of industrial design philosophy that prioritized redundancy and survivability, enabling impossible achievements. But most importantly, they tell a story about American military culture during World War II, a culture that valued individual initiative, rewarded improvisation, and expected junior personnel to make decisions that in other armies required general officers. Sarnoski embodied this culture perfectly. Faced with circumstances beyond any regulation or doctrine, he assessed, planned, and executed an operation that succeeded through technical excellence and tactical audacity. The crashed B-17 in that Bavarian wheat field burned to ashes in September 1943. German salvage crews eventually cleared the wreckage, recovering perhaps 2,000 pounds of aluminum from the 15,000-pound aircraft. The rest was slag, fit only for scrap. The crater from Sarnoski's bomb attack remained visible for years, gradually filled and planted over. By the 1950s, no trace remained of the crash site or the engagement. But in archives across America and Germany, in technical school curricula, in stories told by veterans, Sarnoski's achievement persists. The mechanic who wouldn't quit, the flight engineer who turned defeat into victory, the soldier who proved that American aircraft, even destroyed, could still hurt the Germans. The final statistics frame the achievement in stark terms. American investment: one already destroyed B-17, 0 additional resources. German losses: 3 aircraft destroyed, 29 personnel killed, 6 wounded, critical spare parts lost. German response cost: 3,200 soldiers assigned to wreck guard duties lasting 18 months. Strategic impact: ME-262 deployment delayed, psychological uncertainty created, American morale boosted. These numbers tell one story. The human story is simpler and more profound. A mechanic understood his tools so completely that even in defeat he remained dangerous. He refused to accept that his war was over simply because his aircraft was destroyed. And in refusing to accept defeat, he changed how Germany approached salvage operations, forced resource diversion, and demonstrated that American determination couldn't be overcome by superior force. The German generals who dismissed American fighting spirit learned otherwise. The Luftwaffe officers who'd thought destroyed American aircraft were harmless learned they were wrong. And American mechanics worldwide learned that technical knowledge was a weapon as surely as any gun. Technical Sergeant Joseph Sarnoski's 5-second attack on September 14, 1943, destroyed 2 German transports, killed 29 enemy personnel, and forced institutional changes that consumed thousands of German man-hours for 18 months. But his true achievement was demonstrating that Americans never stopped fighting, even when mathematics said they'd lost. The Germans laughed at the crashed B-17 in that wheat field. Just another write-off. Just more American waste. The laughter died with the crews of 3 U-52 transports when they discovered that Americans didn't know how to quit. And in learning that lesson, Germany learned how they'd lose the war. Buried under American determination, one improvised attack at a time. The highways of Bavaria still run past that wheat field where Patches went down in September 1943. Farmers work the land where a crashed bomber briefly became a weapon. Tourists drive by without knowing that beneath their tires, 80 years ago, a mechanic refused to accept defeat and changed how an empire fought a war. In the Air Force Museum at Wright-Patterson, there's no exhibit for Technical Sergeant Joseph Sarnoski. No B-17 section mentions his name. The displays speak of strategic bombing, of 1,000-plane raids, of the men who flew the missions that destroyed German industry. They don't mention the mechanic who turned a write-off into a weapon with nothing but knowledge, determination, and 5 seconds of perfect execution. Perhaps that's appropriate. Sarnoski never wanted recognition. He did his job under impossible circumstances, survived, and went home to fix cars in Pennsylvania. That 29 Germans died because he refused to quit. That the Luftwaffe changed procedures across Europe because of his 5-second attack. That American mechanics were inspired for generations by his example. These were consequences, not goals. The story lives in classified reports, in fading documents, in memories passed from veteran mechanics to apprentices learning their trade. Remember Sarnosky, they say. Remember the mechanic who wouldn't quit. And in that remembering, the lesson persists. Technical knowledge is power. Determination defeats mathematics. And Americans don't stop fighting just because the odds say they should. The German commanders who dismissed crashed American aircraft as harmless learned otherwise on September 14, 1943. The Luftwaffe officers who thought destroyed bombers were just scrap metal learned they were weapons in the right hands. And American airmen learned that even in defeat, even in death, they could still hurt the enemy. Technical Sergeant Sarnosky proved that, with nothing but a crashed bomber, mechanical knowledge, and absolute refusal to accept that his war was over. The Germans posted guards on aircraft wrecks for 18 months afterward. Thousands of soldiers protecting against a threat that struck once and never repeated. That inefficiency, that waste of resources, that perpetual reaction to American unpredictability, that's how Germany lost. Not through superior American tactics or braver soldiers, but through mechanics who knew their aircraft so well that even destroyed, they remained dangerous. Through engineers who understood that every system had a backup, every problem had a solution, every defeat was just another maintenance challenge. Through soldiers who refused to accept that mathematics determined outcomes. The thunder of 3 Wright Cyclone engines starting in a crashed bomber on that September morning announced a truth the Germans never fully grasped. American aircraft weren't just machines, they were extensions of American industrial will. Break them, burn them, destroy them completely, and Americans would find ways to hurt you anyway. The German generals stopped laughing when they realized that even American scrap was dangerous, that even American defeats came with costs, that even American waste produced results. By then, guards stood watch over aluminum wreckage across occupied Europe. Thousands of soldiers unable to fight because they were protecting against American ingenuity they couldn't predict. Technical Sergeant Joseph Sarnosky died quietly in 1979, his Distinguished Service Cross in a drawer, his story untold, his achievement known only to those who studied obscure incident reports from a forgotten war. But his legacy lives in every mechanic who refuses to quit, every engineer who sees solutions instead of problems, every soldier who understands that knowledge is power and determination defeats mathematics. The crashed bomber in that Bavarian wheat field burned to ash decades ago. The German Sarnosky killed are long dead. The Luftwaffe that changed its procedures to counter his threat ceased to exist in 1945. But the lesson remains, carved into military doctrine, taught in technical schools, whispered among mechanics who understand, Americans never stop fighting, not while tools remain and knowledge persists. The Germans had laughed at the crashed B-17, just another write-off, just more American excess. The laughter died with 3 Ju-52 transports falling from Bavarian skies, destroyed by a bomber that couldn't fly but could fight. And in that silence, Germany learned what America had known all along, that wars are won not by those with the best weapons, but by those who refuse to accept that any weapon is truly destroyed. Technical Sergeant Sarnosky turned a crashed bomber into a deadly decoy for 5 seconds on a September morning in 1943. The Germans spent 18 months and thousands of man-hours responding to those 5 seconds. That disproportion, that asymmetry between American action and German reaction was the mathematics of inevitable defeat. The thunder had spoken from a bomber that should have been silent. The Germans heard it echo for the rest of the war. And when the echoes finally faded in May 1945, they understood too late what Sarnosky had demonstrated in September 1943. Americans don't quit just because they've crashed. They rebuild, they improvise, they attack with whatever remains. And in that refusal to accept defeat, they guarantee victory. The mechanic who wouldn't quit is gone. His bomber is ash. His victims are dust. But his lesson endures. Determination, knowledge, and American ingenuity can turn any defeat into opportunity, any wreckage into a weapon, any impossible situation into 5 seconds that change how empires fight wars. The Germans learned this at Regensburg. They paid the price across 18 months of wasted resources. And in learning, they discovered what Americans had always known, that the war was already lost, not through superior Allied tactics or overwhelming force, but through mechanics like Sarnosky who understood that nothing is truly destroyed while Americans still breathe. The sky above Bavaria is quiet now. The bombers are gone. The fighters are museum pieces. The crashed aircraft were salvaged decades ago. But somewhere in that Bavarian wheat field, the ghost of 3 Wright cyclones still roars on September mornings, reminding the world that Americans never stop fighting, and that even in death, American aircraft remain dangerous in the right hands. Technical Sergeant Joseph Raymond Sarnosky proved it in 5 seconds. The Germans spent 18 months learning the lesson. And America won the war one improvised attack at a time, delivered by mechanics who refuse to accept that mathematics determines fate. The laughter died at Regensburg. The war ended in Berlin. But the thunder of a crashed bomber turning defeat into victory echoes still, reminding us that Americans don't lose. They improvise, adapt, and attack with whatever remains. That's the lesson Sarnosky taught. That's the legacy he left. That's why Germany lost.